Hello and welcome to the third session on reproductive system. So in this session we will be talking about the microscopic details of the male and female sex organs, that is the testis and ovary, and we will be talking about the synthesis of male gamete, that is spermatozoa, and synthesis of female gamete, that is ovum, right? So are you with me? So are you with me? Right. So we will be first starting off with the sex organs in the males. So the primary sex organ. So first of all, the sex organs have two types. We have two types of sex organs. So the first type is the primary sex organ, and the another type is the secondary sex organ. Right, primary and secondary. So what happens in a primary sex organ? Primary sex organ is the organ which produces the gametes. And the secondary sex organs, they somehow help in the propagation of gametes, transfer of gametes, movement of gametes, but they do not directly contribute to the synthesis of gametes. They help gametes in their transfer. Right. So primary sex organs and secondary sex organs. So what is the primary sex organs in case of females? What is the primary one? The primary sex organ in females is your, in case of males, the primary sex organ is the pair of testes, and what are the secondary sex organs? The secondary sex organs are our penis, prostate, seminal vesicle, etc. Right. So these are the primary sex organs and secondary sex organs. So are you with me? Just confirm in the chat if you are with me or not, if you are able to hear what's happening or not. Right. Okay, so basically this is the idea. Now we have already learned about penis, we have already learned about prostate, we have learned about seminal vesicle, etc. Now today we will be dealing in details about the testis, right? The primary sex organ of males. Let's delve into that. So basically, testis is a ovoid structure. Ovoid means what? So it looks like an egg. Basically, it's like a pair of eggs hanging in the scrotum. So this is the structure of the testis, which is an egg-like structure. Now, can you tell me which is the front and which is the back? Always the epididymis, this structure is in the back. So this is the back side and this is the front side. Now if testis is like a egg, now we can cut the testis in two ways. We can have a LS and we can have a TS. If we do a TS of testis, then how the testis would have looked like? This would have the TS, right? So if you do a TS, then the TS will look like this. And if you do an LS of the testis, now over here we have done a very smart kind of an LS. What LS we did over here to the testis? We did a very smart kind of a LS. We did a quarter. We cut out a quarter, and now we get this kind of a situation, right? So this is the idea of LS and TS. We have discussed about LS and TS time and again in our classes. I hope that is clear to you. Is it? Now let's talk about the TS. What happens if you take a TS? What you can see over here, in the TS you have certain round tire like or wheel like structures. These are round structures. Can you identify these round structures? And these round structures are tube, that you can understand because in the tube we have some lumen, like here lumen, lumen, lumen. In the tube we have lumen, isn't it? Can you appreciate that? We have the lumen in the tube. Yes or no? And since you have lumen, you have the lumen over here, these lumen structures are known as your seminiferous tubules. Seminiferous tubules. So these are tubules which somehow contribute to the semen formation. So the seminiferous tubules. And can you see in between these tubules there are certain free spaces? See, this is a free space. There is some free space. There is some gap between the tubules. Here is some gap. Here is some gap. Here is some gap. Can you see the gaps? These gaps are known as interstitium. These gaps are known as interstitium, right? Okay, so in this interstitium we have certain cells known as Leydig cells. Leydig cells, and these Leydig cells secrete testosterone. Under the influence of what? Under the influence of LH. LH influences Leydig cells to produce testosterone, right? I hope we are clear till this. We have discussed these things already in the previous classes. Right. Now this is an exact microscopic depiction of the TS of testis. Now that same picture, if you come to an LS, what you will see? You will see over here you have this coiled tubules. See at the right hand side picture, you have this coiled tubules. These are your seminiferous tubules. These are seminiferous tubules, right? Seminiferous tubules. And the spaces between the seminiferous tubules, these spaces are known as interstitium, right? Okay. Are you with me? This is the basic structural idea about the testis. Then now where the seminiferous tubules drain and then how they get into the vas deferens, we will come to that later on. But till now this was the basic idea that you are supposed to know. Now should I proceed further? Right. So now what happens? We have to understand the BD segment of life. Bit philosophical, bit mathematical, and less biological. So our life is like a segment, line segment, straight line segment. Segment BD. So from birth to death. And between B and D what comes? Comes C. C stands for conception. Conception means giving rise to a baby, to conceive. That means you are born, then you reproduce, then you die. Plain and simple form of life, right? Now what happens? Between birth and death we have C. Between B and D we have C, which is conception, that is giving rise to babies. But for giving rise to babies you need a particular amount of maturity, right? Now the phase, the point where you achieve that maturity, that phase is known as the puberty. right? Or in psychological terms, that is known as adolescence. Adolescence, right? Now, the beginning of the puberty is known as andrarch in case of boys, and menarche in case of girls, right? Are you understanding this? The beginning of puberty. Now, puberty is a very gradual process. It occurs slowly and silently, but you have to mark a certain point in the timeline to mention, okay, this is the beginning, or this is the start point of puberty. Now, this is not a very particular and specific mark, but we have tried to quantify that or substantiate it in the biology. Now, how we mark the menarche? Menarche is the start point of menstrual cycle, the very point of time when the first menstrual cycle takes place in the life of a female. That point is known as the menarche or menarche. This you have to remember. And the andrarchy is a bit diffused kind of terminology, not very well defined, so you may have some problems in understanding the idea of andrarchy. But andrarchy is more or less the starting of puberty in males, right? This is the idea. Now, once after that you finish off puberty, you become sexually mature. So basically the puberty timelines for boys, it is 11 to 14 years. It's for girls it is 11 to 14 years, and in case of boys it is 13 to 15 years approximately. Now, this depends on your availability of nutrition, your body's nutritional ability, energy metabolism, your economic category, your social class, a lot of things, socio-economic, psychological, a lot of things on which this idea depends. Those who are in the poorer countries, they hit puberty later on in their life. Those who are nutritionally poor, they hit puberty later on in life. But those who are in a good economic background, those who are in a good nutritional state, they hit puberty earlier, right? Now this continues. Then there's a point of time in life which is known as C. You eat and you breed. Then after a certain point of time in their life, as age goes on, there's a sudden point when menstrual cycle stops in females. That means they become irreproducible. They are not able to reproduce anymore. That very point is known as menopause. The reproductive ability gets paused, right? The females lost their ability to produce ovum and to menstruate, right? That occurs mostly in India. The mean age is around 50, but that again I told you depends on the economic condition, depends on the social condition, depends on the nutritional status, a lot of things. This can be from 45 to 55, even in 60, right? Now that is the menopause. So menopause is a stark point that you can measure, and a similar term has been assigned known as andropause, the point where male become incapable of breeding. But that is not a stark point. So how it is a gradual process which occurs over tens of years. Now how that happens? The boys become impotent slowly. Their potency decreases, so their ability to achieve an erection and to maintain an erection decreases. Their ability to produce enough volume of semen decreases. Their ability to produce enough number of sperms to be able to fertilize the egg decreases, and this occurs gradually over 10 to 15 years, and the boys lose their ability to reproduce. That idea is known as andropause, right? So these are basic idea that you are supposed to know. Are we clear till this? The idea of puberty, andrarchy, menarche, andropause, menopause. Are we clear with all this idea? And what is the age of reaching puberty and adolescence? right? Now we will move on further. Now we will talk about the spermatogenesis basics. Now what happens in spermatogenesis? Now spermatogenesis occurs within the seminiferous tubule. Within the seminiferous tubule, right? Okay. Now basically what happens? A boy is born, but in this infantile childhood, the boy does not show any sexual activity, any kind of maturation. But at the point where there's an androarch, there's testosterone comes into play, and spermatogenesis starts. Right? So boys start to produce the gametes at puberty. Now that means many of the boys are capable of becoming a father, or capable of giving birth to a child even in their puberty, right? So biological speaking, they are capable. Now how sperms are produced? There are certain cells known as sperm mother cells, which are again 2n diploid cells, because they are the normal cells, somatic cells of our body. Now this undergoes meiosis to form 4 spermatozoa, which are n. This is the basic idea of spermatogenesis, right? So we all know that after meiosis, one cell undergoes two consecutive rounds of division. One is meiosis 1, another one is meiosis 2. After that, one 2n cell gives rise to 4 n cells or haploid cells, right? So one sperm mother cell gives rise to 4 spermatozoa, right? Understanding it? So basically this is the idea. Now all this activity occurs in where? This is your seminiferous tubule. This is your seminiferous, this entire seminiferous tubule. Inside, what's happening over here? You have your sperm mother cell. Sperm mother cell is producing spermatozoa. Spermatozoa is n, sperm mother cell is 2n. This is happening, and how this is happening? This is pituitary. Pituitary is releasing LH. LH is working on Leydig cells. These are Leydig cells. This is secreting testosterone. Testosterone and coming and working on inside the seminiferous tubules to produce spermatozoa, right? That is the basic idea of spermatogenesis. You don't have any more details of it in your syllabus, right? Now moving on to the next part. Shall we move on? Let's do that. Now over here, what controls the spermatogenesis? Now this thing we have dealt with in details in your hormones chapter, Hypothalamus-Pituitary-Testis Axis. What happens in hypothalamus, pituitary and testis? So I would tell you to go and refer that thing. I won't be repeating this. This thing we have already covered in hormones. Can you recall that we have covered this? In endocrine system part 3, we have covered this idea. In the endocrine system part 3 session, we covered this. So I think I can skip this part here. Can I? Right? Now let's move on to the next idea, the ejaculation pathway of sperms. Right? right? Now what happens, can you recall this person, this 7-Up type, 7-Up mascot? This is a mascot of 7-Up. Now this mascot of 7-Up is pointing at the point from which the sperm comes out. Over here the sperm comes out, right? It's correctly pointing that point, but how the sperm comes to this point, that is important. From testis, how the sperm comes to the point from where the sperm is going to come out of body, that is the important part of our discussion. That is our ejaculation pathway. Now to remember that, remember about the cold drink 7-Up. Now the 7-Up, the S stands for the seminiferous tubule. Seminiferous tubule is the site of synthesis of sperm, site of synthesis, right? Then we have epididymis. After seminiferous tubule, what we have, this part is the epididymis. Can you recall? After epididymis, what we have? V is your vas deferens. This part is your vas deferens, right? This part vas deferens. Then this region from seminal vesicle to your attachment of the urethra, this part, dark red highlight, is your ejaculatory duct. Then it continues down as the urethra. This is urethra, and finally goes into the penis and comes out from the tip of it, right? So you have to remember this. Now are we clear till this, the idea of 7-Up? Will you be able to recall this? Will you be able to keep it in mind? Right? So now over here, if you see between 7, S and E, we have R and E. So over here, two more parts come in that you have to remember between S and E. That is retitestis. A part just after seminiferous tubule, you have a small segment of tube, that is retitestis, and then you have vasa efferentia. Vasa efferentia. So retitestis and vasa efferentia. So this is more or less the ejaculation pathway, the pathway through which the sperm travels, right? And now when the sperm travels through this path, what happens? One interesting fact, let me tell you. The sphincter at the end of bladder over here, this sphincter closes down so that urine could not leak into the urethra. That means only semen or urine can pass through the urethra at one time. Both cannot pass through, right? These are two tubes between seminiferous tubule and epididymis. It's like the connecting roads. They just connect epididymis with the seminiferous tubule, right? So after seminiferous tubule, the sperm gets into the retitestis. Retitestis is a tubule, and then it gets into the vasa efferentia, and after that it continues down the epididymis, vas deferens, ejaculatory duct, urethra and penis, right? If you can remember those names, it's fine. If you cannot remember those names, leave them, right? So is it done? Have you taken a screenshot or have you noted down? This is important. Right? Should we proceed? Let's move on. Then what happens? So we have talked about dartos and cremaster. I'm not getting into that. Okay. Now a few disorders about the spermatogenesis. Okay, so the process of sperm formation we already discussed is known as spermatogenesis. Okay, let's get back to it. Okay, note it down. And what about the sound quality? Is the sound quality is good, or is there any problem with the sound quality? Can you hear it clear and loud? Right, I think you have done noting it down. Now let's proceed with the next part. Okay, so let's proceed, and now let's talk about a few disorders related to spermatogenesis. Now, what is spermatogenesis? A bit of recall. So spermatogenesis is the process of formation of sperms. Sperms in proper biological language is called as spermatozoa, right? Now spermatozoa are the gametes of males. Those are produced in the testis. That's why testis is known as the primary sex organ. Primary sex organs produce gametes, right? Secondary sex organs help in passage of the gamete or help in the functioning of the gamete, right? Within the testis, where the sperm is produced, in the seminiferous tubule, right? From how the sperm comes out of seminiferous tubule, it's 7 up. What is that? From seminiferous tubule into the epididymis, then into the vas deferens, then into your ejaculatory duct, then into urethra, and finally penile urethra and out of the body. Now between epididymis and seminiferous tubule, what we have? We have ready testis and we have vasa efferentia, right? So this was a bit of discussion. Now what will happen if the sperm synthesis is not taking at par? That means the synthesis of sperms is not, from point of view of quality or quantity, those things are not at par with the requirements of the body. Then what will happen? Now whenever there is a production or synthesis of whatever it is, in human body or in a factory or in a industry, whatever it is, you need to have a quality control and you have a quantity control. How good and how many, right? Now you need proper quality of sperms to able to fertilize the ovum and make a female pregnant. You need enough number of sperms to be able to make a female pregnant, right? Now how that happens? Azoospermia. What happens in azoospermia? Azoospermia, A means, zoospermia is a name of spermatozoa. A means no or none. So no sperm in the semen. Okay, right? No sperm in the semen. So this person will never be able to impregnate a female. Now oligozoospermia. Oligo means few sperms in the semen, but the number is not enough to make a female pregnant, right? Then we have asthenozoospermia. Asthenia means slow. So the sperms are slow. They are so slow, they are never able to reach, they will never be able to reach the ovum in the ampulla of the fallopian tubule, right? They are very slow. Here slow but steady does not win the race, because in between, if you stay for long in the female reproductive tract, the sperm will die off. So they have limited amount of time to reach to the ovum so that they can fertilize the ovum. If they cross that amount of time, they will die off, right? So asthenozoospermia, people will not be able to fertilize an ovum. And what is teratozoospermia? Terato means abnormal shape. That means the sperms are abnormally shaped, right? So they will also not be able to produce or create a pregnancy. Now teratozoospermia and asthenozoospermia are quality problems. Oligozoospermia and asthenozoospermia are quantity problems. Right? Are we clear with this? Can we move on? Should we move on? Have you noted it down or taken screenshot? Have you noted it down? Right. Okay. So, right. Now, let's move on to the next part, to the female part of the story. Now, let's move on to the female part of the story. We are here. Yeah, lots of sperms are wasted like that. Only one sperm gets to fertilize the ovum. The other are like the royal troop of the king. The king gets the kingdom. The rest are just useless. Right? So many other sperms get wasted. Should we start with the female part of it? Now in females, what we discussed, we learned about the menarche. Menarche means the start of menstrual cycle that occurs in the puberty, and that marks the beginning of the puberty, right? Now, menstrual cycle is a cyclic change in the hormonal levels in the body, which involve directly or indirectly different organs. Now, out of these organs, can you tell me which organs are not involved? So can you tell me what are the organs out of these which are not at all involved in the menstrual cycle? Just a bit of wild intuition, a wild guess. Just try to do that. We will come back to this question later on after we finish off the learning about menstrual cycle, and then we will see which of the organs are related and which of the organs are not at all related. So let's move on with the menstrual cycle. Thyroid. Okay, so I have seen your answer, thyroid. So let's see what happens. Now let's talk about menstrual cycle, a bit basics to start off. The menstrual cycle is the periodic physiological changes occurring in different organ systems in females, mainly in uterus, ovaries and cervix. These are the main organs. These are directly involved, but there are many other organs which are indirectly involved in the menstrual cycle that makes pregnancy possible. So menstrual cycle is an attempt to make pregnancy possible. This is a grand preparation for pregnancy, right? Like we have preparation for Diwali, we have preparation for Christmas, we have preparation for Eid, we have preparation for pregnancy in the female body. Now the cycle is required for production of oocytes. The cyclic hormonal changes that take place in the ovaries are important for the synthesis of oocytes, that is your ovum, and preparation of the uterus for pregnancy. At the same point of time, they prepare the uterus for pregnancy, right? The menstrual cycle occurs due to the rise and fall of estrogen. So the main hormone involved in the menstrual cycle is your estrogen. Many other hormones are involved, but the main hormone of importance is estrogen, right? So are we clear till this? So these are the important parts. Another thing, menstrual cycle is a periodic physiological event. Physiological. It is not pathological. So it is not a disease. Many ill-educated people in India still believe that menstruation is a disease. People think menstruation is disease, menstruation is impure. All those things are rubbish. Menstruation is not a disease. It is a normal body process. It's like sleeping, eating, drinking kind of a thing, and it does not make a person impure. There's no biological basis to that, right? Let's move on. Now we have learned about the female reproductive tract. You know about the female reproductive tract. This is the ovary. Now this is a random quiz. Just I will point out the part, you will be naming the part. Now what is this tube called? What is the name of this tube? Fast. You can use short forms also to write. Fast. What is the tube? We learned in the previous class. It is fallopian tube, right? Right? Then what is this region? Name of this region. What is this? Fast, fast, fast. We are running out of time. Fallopian tube. Very good. Next, what is this part highlighted on the top of the uterus with red pen? What is that part? What is it? Fundus, right? Very good. This part, this tube like part over here, this part, this tube like region connecting the uterus with the vagina, what is that? Cervix. Very good. Very, very good. So now with this we more or less have the idea about the female reproductive tract. Now again, the BD segment of life, we will be repeating whatever we learned right now. So you have a birth, then you have a death, and in between you have C for conception, right? Conceiving a baby. Now between B and D we have C, but there's a phase in which we have menarche. Menarche is the starting of menstrual cycle, and the age of starting puberty in females is your what? Females puberty is 11 to 14 years, right? And but again, that depends on what? In economic condition, social condition, nutritional status, and a lot other things. All right. And then there's a stage known as how the reproductive phase ends. What is the name of that phase? We just learned. What is the name of that phase, or that point where the reproductive ability ends in a female? Menopause, right? Menopause, right? Menopause. Very good. Right, so this is the basic idea that we were supposed to discuss. Now we are going to the oogenesis part. Basically what happens in the oogenesis, there are cyclic steps that takes place within the ovary under the influence of what hormones? FSH and LH. And finally what happens? There are different follicles. All of these are known as ovarian follicles. Alright. Okay, and finally what happens, this follicle, the final follicle, can you see this very large follicle? This follicle is known as a Graafian follicle. From this Graafian follicles results from development of small follicles. Ovary is filled with very small follicles. Now in each cycle, one follicle starts to mature under the influence of FSH and LH. Now that follicle keeps on maturing stepwise fashion, and finally it forms a Graafian follicle. Now at the time of ovulation, the Graafian follicle ruptures and this ovum is released out of the ovary and taken up by the infundibulum of fallopian tube. Right? Now the ruptured Graafian follicle that is left behind, that forms your, by stepwise fashion, forms your corpus luteum. Can you remember the corpus luteum? Can you remember the corpus luteum that we read in the hormones chapter? Corpus luteum secretes which hormone? Progesterone, right? Can you recall that? Just wait for a bit and try to assimilate what I said. I said a lot of things very fast. What happens? Inside the ovary, there are so many follicles. Now, in every month, our menstrual cycle takes around a month. Now, in every month, under the influence of FSH and LH, one follicle starts to mature. Now, which follicle will start maturing? That is completely a factor of luck and probability. Now, the follicle which starts to mature keeps on maturing in a stepwise fashion until it reaches the final stage, that is the Graafian follicle. Now, at the time of ovulation, the Graafian follicle ruptures and releases the ovum out of the ovary. Now, this release of the ovum is sensed by one of the longest fimbriae and is sucked up by the infundibulum, and then that ovum continues its journey through the fallopian tube, reaches the ampulla. If sperm is there, gets fertilized. Otherwise, it continues down further through the fallopian tube. And what happens to the left behind part of ruptured Graafian follicle? The ruptured, destroyed part of the Graafian follicle, that becomes yellow in color. Why it becomes yellow in color? It takes up a lot of cholesterol. It gets laden up with cholesterol, becomes yellow in color and forms a yellow colored mass. Mass in Latin is known as corpus, yellow is known as luteum. It forms corpus luteum. Right? Now, corpus luteum secretes one of the major hormones of female body, that is progesterone. Right? Are we clear till this? Now let's move forward. Now let's come to the uterine cycle or the menstrual cycle. Alright. Now menstrual cycles are mostly of the duration of 28 days. Mostly females have a menstrual cycle of 28 days, and that's why it is known as a monthly cycle. Some females get it for 30 days, 26 days, 32 days, but average is 28 days. Right? Now this part you will understand very clearly. Menstrual cycle is a very difficult concept to understand. So after every question that I ask, answer in yes or no, Y or N. Right? So now the average of menstrual cycle is 28 days. Clear? Yes or no? Yes or no? Right. Now menstrual cycle has 3 phases. 3 phases. Now what happens? From 1 to 5th day, this phase, there's bleeding. 1 to 5th day, there's bleeding. This part of the menstrual cycle. Can you see the wall is bleeding? What happened? We discussed the outer portion of the endometrium sheds off. with a lot of blood. That is the bleeding of the menstrual cycle, right? So this phase is known as the bleeding phase or menstrual phase, right? Clear? Yes or no? Then what we have, so this phase is what people talk about a lot. This is the time of the month when girls bleed for 5 to 7 days. Some may bleed for 3 days, some may bleed for 5 days or 7 days. More or less 5 to 7 days is the duration of this part, right? Then what happens, from 5th day to 14th day onwards, not actually 14th, some few days onwards, what happens, can you see the shed of endometrium again grows in size? This is the regrowth, this length. The endometrium slowly grows in thickness, becomes spongy, not actually spongy, cushiony, right? Growth is known as proliferation. So this phase is known as proliferative phase. For uterus, and follicular phase for ovary, because at this point of time the follicles start to develop under the influence of FSH and LH that we just saw in the previous slides. Clear? Right. So then from 14 to 28, actually the last 14 days, that is this part of the duration, what happens, the glands in the uterus, can you see these glands secrete a lot of nutritious fluid in the hope that a sperm has gone up through the female reproductive tract, has fertilized an ovum, and the ovum is converted into a small zygote or embryo. That embryo will take up the nutritious fluid and get embedded or implanted. So this phase is for uterus is known as secretory phase for uterus. But at this point of time, after ovulation, what happens? Okay, so when ovulation takes place at day 14, more or less at day 14, ovulation takes place. So after ovulation, what happens in uterus? Corpus luteum forms, and corpus luteum secretes progesterone. So that phase is known as luteal phase in ovary. I know my writing got a bit messy, but try to understand again. Are we clear till this? Then I will repeat it again. Let me repeat. What happens? Now every females undergo a monthly cycle of 28 days to 30 days every month. This cycle is due to rise and fall in the hormone levels. Now how the hormone levels are rising and falling, that is beyond the scope of our syllabus, that's why we are not discussing. So apart from that, we can classify this entire cycle into 3 parts. The first part being the bleeding phase. At this part, what happens? The outer layer of the uterine endometrium sheds off along with blood, and that part, that 5 to 7 days, constitute the bleeding phase, and females bleed through their vagina. This is the and this phase gives rise to all that embarrassment, societal stigma, impurity, blah blah blah, all those stuff that is discussed. Everything is about this 5 days. All right. After that, what happens? The outer layer of the uterine endometrium is shed off. Right? This is the outer layer. This entire outer layer is shed off. Then from 5th day onwards, for a few days, there is reproliferation of the uterine endometrium. The outer layer of the uterine endometrium regrows or proliferates under the action of estrogen, right? This phase is known as proliferative phase for uterus because the uterine endometrium is proliferating, but at the same point of time in ovary, follicles are maturing under the influence of LH and FSH, and that's why for ovary that same period of time is known as the follicular phase, right? Now the duration of this follicular phase is variable. We are coming to that. Okay. Okay. Right. Now at day 14, more or less day 14, what happens? Ovulation takes place. Most of the females have their total cycle of 28 to 30 days. In them, around day 14 or 15, the ovulation takes place. Right? After ovulation, the next 14 days, what happens? The uterine endometrium, the glands of the uterine endometrium becomes active. They secrete nutritious fluid around the endometrium in the hope that if one embryo comes in to implant in the uterine wall, they will be able to provide that embryo with sufficient nutrition, right? But things don't work out as you hope always. So in most of the times in the life of a female, almost in all of the times, the ovary does not get an sperm. In 1 or 2 situations, in females having 1 or 2 kids, the ovary gets a sperm, right? And but in this time period, after ovulation, the next 14 days, what's happening in the ovary? Just recall, the ruptured Graafian follicle is there in the ovary after the release of ovum. Now that ruptured Graafian follicle takes up cholesterol, gets cholesterol laden. That cholesterol laden structure forms a corpus luteum. Now this corpus luteum secretes progesterone. This is what happens for the next 14 days in the ovary, and that's why in the ovary this time period is known as the luteal phase. And as the glands of the uterine endometrium are secreting at this phase, so for uterus this phase is known as the secretory phase. Right? But at the end of this 28 days, what happens? If conception has not taken place, that means fertilization has not taken place, there is no embryo, there's a sudden fall in the estrogen and progesterone levels. That sudden fall in estrogen and progesterone levels trigger the breakdown of outer layer of endometrium, which shows up as the menstrual bleeding. So during the 28th day time, suddenly the hormone levels drop, and this sudden drop in the hormone levels result in bleeding. Right? Are we clear with this? Are we clear? Now is it clear for you? This is a very oversimplified idea of menstrual cycle. Menstrual cycle is not that simple, but in your syllabus you do not have anything more than that. Now one last thing that before which I finish the class today, the one last thing after which I will be finishing the class today. That is the duration of menstrual, if the duration of menstrual cycle is x, suppose duration is x days, then tell me ovulation will occur on x by 2 day, x by 3 day, x minus 14 day. Option A, option B, option C. What will be the answer? If the total menstrual cycle that we discussed is about 28 to 30 days in females, if the total menstrual cycle is of x days, then ovulation will occur in x by 2 day, x by 3 day, or x minus 14 day. Simply answer that. With this, we will finish off today's discussion over here. Tell. Fast. Tell this. Let me help you out over here. Since we are running out of time, let me help you out over here. The bleeding phase has a constant time. It will be 5 to 7 days. The luteal phase is again very constant. It will be of 14 days. So follicular phase has variable duration. And you are wrong. Follicular phase has variable duration. Luteal phase has to be 14 days, and luteal phase starts just after ovulation. This is important. Luteal phase is always of 14 days, and luteal phase just starts after ovulation. So if luteal phase is of 14 days and your luteal phase starts just after ovulation, your answer will be x minus 14. So answer will be x minus 14 day will be my day of ovulation, right? This is the main problem students face, because the teaching process is such that they take 28 days as the standard reference and teach you, right? More or less this was about the uterine cycle, menstrual cycle, oogenesis, how ovum is formed, female sex organ, male sex organ, spermatogenesis and all. And in one last class is remaining, in which we will be talking about fertilization, embryogenesis, twins, contraception, reproductive health, etc. Right? Until then, bye bye. Meet you in the next class.